Well, hi, friends. Welcome back to How to Eat an Elephant. And Merry Christmas to all of you.
Merry Christmas.
Merry
Episode
Christmas.
before Christmas.
Last episode before Christmas. Those of you who have been following along, we are so grateful for your attention, and we hope you're enjoying this novel as much as we are. You guys, how is the reading going for you? How are you feeling? I mean, we've made some significant progress.
Yeah, no kidding.
We really have.
570 pages in my edition into this novel at this point. So pat yourselves on the back. That's pretty impressive.
It is kind of funny, though, that it still feels like we're in introductory matter, almost. Like one of our main characters is still a little kiddo, and Jean Valjean's only just now figuring out who he is. It feels very much like exposition at page 550.
It's
Dickens
really true,
and Hugo would have had a lot to talk about.
It seems
Dickens
like we're
is like,
about
the
to get a
best
time
part
jump.
is the beginning. Let's always be in the beginning.
I remember when I was a kid, I was assigned David Copperfield far too young, far too young. I was entering junior high when David Copperfield was handed to me by my parents, and I hated it.
Of course.
I absolutely hated it. There was between 700 and 800 pages of introductory matter. And then the entire scope of the plot began and ended in the last 150 pages. And I thought, I have just wasted a significant percentage of my young life. I hate this book.
I know that. Oh, sorry, Emily.
No. I was just going to say, I feel like at this point, the majority of the CenterForLit universe knows that story. And so what's going to have to happen is we're going to have to
do David Copperfield.
I know.
Yeah.
I know it's coming. I know it's coming.
I know I made the association between Hugo and Dickens, but I will give Hugo this. There is plenty of action. It just still feels like progress in terms of the maturing and overarching like soul plot of the main characters is still nascent, you know?
Yeah.
But there is plenty of, there's dueling and there's hiding from the police and there's all kind of stuff.
Well, I also wonder how much of our perception of this is necessarily affected by the Broadway musical. Because it's an adaptation and it's relatively faithful, although I guess we've yet to find out how faithful it is because we haven't gotten to that stage of the plot yet. But they've had to cut a lot in order to fit it into a Broadway musical length.
Sure. So they've changed the pacing forever of the story.
Right. And so the story that we know and love hasn't happened yet. Maybe that's why it feels to us like we're still in introductory matter.
Isn't that just a feature of these like long winding books that we read on this podcast, that the main overarching plot's always going to be a little loose and there's going to be a lot more like episodic narratives throughout.
And long digressions that are thematic in nature. And if you've signed up for How to Eat an Elephant, that's what you signed up for, is long, windy, thematic interpretation.
You just never know what you're going to get on a reading week,
It's really true. Well, this week...
to that point, it does seem like it's better than our last interpretation, which was all about nunneries,
Oh my goodness. The vitriol. Okay, so that's a great lead-in question, actually. This week, we transition to plot, and we get way more actual action than we did in the previous section. But it's still in the context of the cloister, and he still takes time off to pot shot at it once or twice. And the question I have for you guys is, do you think his tone is any more moderate than it was in the previous section?
I thought so. I was like, oh, here he is again. Here's Hugo that we've come to know and love.
Like the vitriol was just a flight of passion, and then now he's back.
Yeah, and like he's very respectful, and he like once again he's using the things of the convent to have serious thematic conversations, which is just has to be a sign of respect, right? Mm-hmm. He's using the imagery of life there to talk about ideas that he really cares about.
Yeah. Megan, do you think that too? Or did it still strike you that he was like sniggering behind his hand at the convent ladies?
I don't know that he's sniggering behind his hand, but I definitely think that he is leaning on his big long digression still. And is it Fauchelevent? Is that how you say his name? Fauchelevent's
I'm gonna call him
interaction. Sure, Fauchy. He and his interaction with the prioress, he's definitely comes out as the intelligent one in that scenario, which I think is a furtherance of the tone that Hugo had before towards the strictness of this convent, that he is able to understand what they want, these nuns, and play to what will make them comfortable. Meanwhile, understanding and buying in are different. And he's comfortable there, eager to serve them and using the things that he can in this convent to his own ends, which I think is a little bit cynical if you look at it, depending on how you look at it. I don't know. I didn't believe that his tone was entirely warm now.
Yeah, I think you might be right. And it seems like he is drawing out this distinction between, well, the broadest version of it is between life and death. But also a distinction between spiritual concerns and earthly ones. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that he's trying to sketch a picture of holiness, right? Of human sanctity, not perfect holiness as in God, but of human holiness. Mm-hmm. And already it seems as though he's leaning towards human holiness as defined by a marriage of spiritual concerns and earthly ones. And the cloister represents spiritual concerns to the exclusion of earthly ones. And in that way, it's ineffective, misses the mark,
limited,
et cetera, et cetera. Very, limited, but beautiful and respectable, but limited though, right?
Right. That they need Fauchelevent as much as he respects them. They're kind of innocent in a childish way. Like they need him to take care of them in some ways. Limited, I think, is the best word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a line where it says that Fauchelevent was capable of clothing these ghosts or these corpses in life, like in flesh again. And he himself seems to represent a kind of earthy holiness or wisdom.
Yeah, uneducated but cunning.
Cunning and kind, but only because but he's only kind because it says he's been breathing the air of the convent for so long that it has destroyed his personality.
So there's that little description is so interesting. I was going to point that out. Isn't that a backhanded compliment? Right? Like on the one hand, he's been in the cloister long enough that it has bred peace and humility and a lot of the virtues that we associate with holiness. On the other hand, in order to do that, it has destroyed his personality. And I'm using Hugo's words.
But hand in hand with that description, it's described as he was really selfish all of his life. And now at the end of his life, he found it sweet to be grateful, sweet like drinking wine on his deathbed. Like he's never tasted something as fulfilling as what he's doing now. So it's both and. It's kind of a cynical look. And also it's acknowledging the, I'm losing all my words today. The efficacy of like gratitude, the good that does for your soul is firmly acknowledged in this passage.
Yeah.
So I don't think he's looking down his nose at virtue or a life that's about the pursuit of virtue. I don't know what to take from this scene.
Go ahead, Emily.
Well, I was thinking about the air imagery, that it's the air that he breathes. And we're also told that Jean Valjean was blown in by a wind into the convent. And so I wonder if it's not, if he's using the spirituality of the convent. On the one hand, he is having the conversation. You can't just have that. Like he ties wealth, like material well-being, to like spiritual well-being. He's done that for Cosette and for Jean Valjean. And so you also, in your virtue, have to tie the spiritual to the material. But I wonder if it also works the other way, that maybe Fauchelevent and Jean Valjean were too material, and there's something about it like wind, right? Like a Holy Spirit. There's an inspiration taking place here by being put in contact with such a spiritual force or atmosphere or something like that.
Yeah, I think you might be right. Well, let's jump into the plot of it and run through how the action of the thing takes place before we dive back into the thematic conversation, because there's more to say about this, I think. But a set of, as Megan put it before we got on the air, particularly on the nose images leads us to that conversation. So the problem here in this section is that while Jean Valjean and Cosette have been delivered by quote unquote falling from heaven into this convent, they're now in a spot of trouble because men aren't allowed in the convent. The only man that's allowed is Fauchelevent.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, Foshi. And and so
They also call
now
him Fauvent, by the way, if you'd like an actual nickname.
there are like 3 different versions. I mean, eventually his reputation gets out, and the archbishop or whomever it is learns of him
you're
by
right.
yet another name. So
Yep,
it's just
you're right.
crazy.
But that's thematically significant, right?
I know, but we're not going there
Okay.
yet.
Too
So-
soon.
So the problem is this: Valjean has made it out of the web that Javert set for him and into a place of safety, and now wants to stay. He says to himself, now I have to stay here. This is my new place. But he can't do that because he's not allowed in, and he hasn't entered by acceptable means.
Mm-hmm.
And so his instinct is to stay put. Fauchelevent, however, with superior understanding of the cloister and the habits of the nuns there, knows that he has to get him out again. So now he has to escape from safety back into danger so that he can make it into safety again. Tricky, Hugo. You tricky guy.
I liked the way that he phrased that problem to Jean Valjean. He acknowledges it and he says, it wouldn't be right to have you found here like this. Where have you come from? For me, you fell from heaven because I know you. But for the nuns, you have to come in at the door. Our conversation that we were just having about this interplay between the spiritual and the physical seems turned on its head right here. For Fauchelevent, who knows Father Madeleine and associates him with purity and perfection, he's kind of a virtue symbol in his mind. He takes it on faith. He doesn't need an explanation that's physical for how Father Madeleine got there or why he should stay. But for the nuns, who are usually symbolic of that spiritual, not physical realm, they need a physical explanation for why he's going to be there, which I think is interesting. It's an interesting transition.
It also seems to be biblical imagery, right? You have to come through the narrow door to get in. I was thinking of a scene from earlier where we were told that when the nuns entered the convent, they are dressed in their wedding best.
Yes.
And are forced to basically be crucified while everyone chants that they're dead. This seems to be a continuation on that theme.
Yeah, I think so too.
The death and rebirth imagery begins right away. Because as this conversation is happening, a nun is dead or a nun is dying. And he says, the nun is dead. It's daybreak. She died at daybreak. Daybreak is always when people die. I thought that was a beautiful underscoring of this idea too, that it's at the beginning of the day that life ends. So there's death and rebirth. Yeah, you wake up again in a new life. Yeah,
it seems really clear that he wants to talk about death and life. And that those ideas are wedded to the spiritual and the physical, two different realms. And how do we enter them, right? This is the question of the passage. How on earth are we supposed to enter into life, both spiritual and real? And it's very Christian in the sense that it's a strange answer. It's the world turned upside down. The only way to get in is to die for all of these nuns, right? I mean, he's taken pains to point out to us that they're living a living death, that they have removed themselves from life as it properly is described in every possible way. And I think he has yet to really tell us whether that was worthwhile, whether it will be worthwhile for Valjean and for Cosette. But I'm hopeful after this passage. I mean, I think there's going to be good things that come out of convent living for both of them. Megan, you nodded and then shook and then nodded again. What?
Well, I don't want to jump too soon to the end of the chapter, but I thought of another thing I can say without leading us astray here. We are allowed to be hopeful, even though there's all kinds of imagery about graves and death and crucifixion and people dying at daybreak, and it's all very dark. But also, Fauchelevent is a gardener. The service that he does in the convent is to garden, and he also helps with grave digging. So he says a gardener is something of a grave digger. I think the association goes both ways. On the one hand, this is a living death, and to be in this convent is a prison, and you have to die to get in here, and it's all very horrible. And, they wear hairy underclothes, for goodness sake. It's very uncomfortable in here. But at the same time, it's eternally associated with with dawn, with new things growing. Little girls come and hang out in the convent. There's an equal part of youth and beauty and growth and new life to match the darkness. And I hope that with Cosette coming in, a character that we know who is youth and beauty and loveliness to Jean Valjean, that we'll get to see that part maybe bring new life into this convent as well. So I was hopeful because of the gardening image that Cosette's going to be like a little seed planted in this convent that brings hope, not just for Jean Valjean, but maybe for the rest of the people in here.
It reminded me of the Bishop Muriel. We've had a couple gardeners in our story thus far. And of course, by the end, Jean Valjean is himself going to become a gardener, which was his original profession, a pruner.
A pruner.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's slightly different, though. A pruner, you think of the parable of like getting the branches cast off, you're paring down, but a gardener cultivates more growth instead.
But they're both necessary because without the pruner, the tree won't bear fruit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder if the pruner represents that marriage of the spiritual and the physical. What a gardener is doing is essentially employing death to bring life. Puts a seed into the ground, seed dies, sprouts, and new life comes out of it, right? From burial comes life. But then the pruner looks at the budding tree and says, we are going to cut pieces off of you. Painful imagery, right? We're going to cut pieces off of you. We're going to employ suffering, not death, but suffering to bring forth fruit. And so maybe that's a step out of the convent into the church militant or something like that. I don't know. We're getting far afield at this point. But so the part that you were talking about being on the nose, Megan, is that clearly given, I mean, and you could see it from the very first moment, I assume.
Absolutely.
I certainly could. Clearly given the fact that this nun is dead and that the prioress and the rest of the nuns have decided to bury her inside their chapel beneath the altar, which was her dying wish and is illegal for health reasons. We don't want a corpse decaying below our feet. That's bad for you, but they don't care, right? Render unto Caesar and all that good stuff, unless you can bamboozle Caesar, seems to be their perspective. So clearly Valjean is going to make his way out of the convent by taking the place of this dead nun in her coffin, going out and being buried and then resurrected and then brought back in as Fauchelevent's brother.
Right.
I thought it was curious that Fauchelevent keeps calling it a farce throughout.
Yeah.
And it's like a caper. There is a sense in which reading this passage was like reading a spy novel. And it's French farce is a true genre.
Right.
And so it's both weighty and
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Up to and including the nun who's just died. Her name is Mother Crucifixion, in case you were confused about the imagery.
Still missing it.
Yep. Mother Crucifixion has spent the last 20 years or so sleeping in a coffin because that's what she chose to do.
With permission from the Archbishop.
Wow, right, because that'd be too dark otherwise.
Right.
Evidently. So she sleeps
like
in her
vampire.
coffin. Yeah, she's a vampire nun.
Really
so we have an excess coffin, which is very convenient, and it lends itself to the farcical tone that you're talking about. And then the prioress even says, well, what do we do with an empty coffin? Like, you got to put something in there. And Fauchelevent's like, earth. And she goes, yes, that'll work because a body really is just earth. That's great. It's so convenient that it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's convenient that it's convenient and ridiculous in the context of the plot, certainly. I also think, though, that his line about it being a farce, he plays a little bit of the holy fool in saying that. Because on the one hand, this community is committed to a kind of expiation, right? That there's a beautiful parallel in Valjean's mind after he has successfully made it back in and is now a gardener in this convent. Beautiful parallel between the kind of prison that he was in before and this new prison of the convent, and the kind of expiation happening, which is very personal and individual before in the prison, that is now on behalf of all mankind when it comes to the convent and the cloister. So on the one hand, they're committed to sacrificing themselves that all mankind might be forgiven. On the other hand, their rules make it functionally impossible to help any people. You can't help anyone, right? Like how many works of literature are there in the world where people wash up on the doorstep of a monastery, for example, or wash up on the doorstep of a church, and they're in trouble and they have no money and there's no room at the inn, and all they can do is come to the church and say, help me. And the church says, well, since I am the physical embodiment of the love of Jesus, of course I will help you. The rules at this particular cloister prevent that intentionally.
Right.
So a little bit when Fauchelevent says, what a farce, I think he is not angrily and not bitterly, but with sort of a rub in the back of his neck and shrugging, saying, you know, it seems like this is what we're here to do. So I'm going to lie as often as I need to. I'm going to do whatever is necessary to bamboozle this establishment so that it can do what it is supposed to be doing.
Yeah, that puts him in relationship to the convent in the same, like that's a mirror image of the convent's relationship to the Paris authorities.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's good.
There's a section where the prioress says, you know, no one was like, they didn't find out. This will not harm anything.
Right.
The no one, like, as if to say, you know, rules that are in place when they're broken, if it doesn't hurt anybody that they're broken, well, were they really good rules to begin with? And
which is ironic. It's so ironic.
Well, and Fauchelevent seems to be doing the same thing, right? Nobody knows who Jean Valjean really is. It doesn't really hurt anything that he's there. So everything is fine.
Yeah. I do think it's really funny that what is necessary in order to save a good man and a helpless child is to lie to the people who are holy. That's ironic. That's dramatic irony, I think. Megan, your thoughts?
I'm just stuck on the description of Fauchelevent as ignorant, yet wise to things that the convent doesn't prize. So he knows everything, and yet he conceals it, the knowledge that he does have. And it's kind of artistic the way that he does that. So he's built a reputation for himself. The convent thinks he's stupid. And Hugo says, a great merit in religion. So I'm just thinking about this concept of,
dang, Hugo.
well, it's brutal. Yeah. But I'm thinking about it. Like, I think he doesn't ever drop a line like that without an intention. And he seems to be meditating on the nature of faith and taking things on faith and not requiring an explanation for some things, and trusting that some things really do come from the hand of God and being satisfied with that. I think that we see that from the nuns. They aren't questioning Fauchelevent. I think they're not stupid women. They just want him to stay out of sight and do what they need him to do, and then they're not going to think about him any more than that. And so he's got some leeway here to do
Their
what
eyes
he
are fixed on
needs to
God,
do.
so they can't see what's happening in front of them.
Right. And that's kind of a mercy in our character's scenario. So I do think that there is a meditation on faith here in the background, and the necessity of, I don't know, trusting something beyond your own explanations of things. There being some things that it's all right that he's not offering them the full truth. They don't need it. She says, of this whole project that she's asking him to help her with, burying a nun illegally underneath their altar. It would be such a miracle, a glory to God for our community. Miracles spring from tombs. She is eager to see miracles come into the convent. And what we know from, an external perspective is that a miracle has come into the convent already. The God figure of our story has dropped, at least from Fauchelevent's perspective, has dropped another man into the convent who will be there to stay, which is a miracle. That's impossible. He's already done the impossible. And this nun is, whether she knows it or not, eager to see a miracle spring into this community.
I like that. I like that reading a lot. It's a lot happier and a lot more, it's a lot warmer than the other dramatic irony reading.
Right,
Emily,
which I think is also there. Yeah.
This might be a stretch, but in the conversation that the prioress has with Fauchelevent about setting up this situation, she goes on that long meditation about basically where she's trying to convince herself that this is an okay thing to do.
Because she's certainly not trying to convince Fauchelevent.
Yeah. And she says that she's stuck between Benedict on the right and Bernard on the left, the two saints of her order. And she says that Fontaine in Burgundy is blessed for having been the birthplace of Bernard. And of course, that's Fontaine with an O, but Fontaine with an A is the birthplace, or, metaphorically speaking, of Cosette, who is about to be placed within this convent. I just wondered if that is maybe Hugo playing with the words there and kind of saying the same thing that you both have been saying just now.
Oh, I like that. I missed that.
That's at the very least cool footnote material for a college paper on this novel.
Absolutely.
So the whole thing goes off almost exactly as you expect it to. There's a reversal at the last minute where the gravedigger has died and been replaced by someone that can't easily be manipulated.
Which is the farce of it, right?
Yeah.
Like everything goes perfectly well.
He's dead.
Like, it's gonna be great. And like as a reader, you're like, oh no. Like this thing that they've been relying on as the easiest part is obviously the part that's gonna go wrong.
Clearly
of
it's
course.
the hardest part. And so then the final meditation opens as Valjean almost literally passes from life to death and back to life again. He faints because they actually bury the coffin and the air holes get closed over and suffocation happens even if you're a big strong guy. So he faints and then is miraculously resurrected as open air comes back into the coffin.
And it says that resurrection is sometimes more frightening than death, which I thought was an interesting comment.
Yeah. But he is saved at the last minute and ends up accepted into the convent, which then prompts a long meditation from Valjean himself in his own mind and heart over these two situations. We mentioned them earlier. His earlier prison sentence, which was a project of personal expiation, is the way that Hugo puts it, and the convent, which is also an imprisonment, but is not for personal expiation. It's rather for expiation of the sins of the world. What did you guys think of this meditation? Because I think this is the logical extension of what we were talking about earlier in the episode. Tension between death and life, between spirituality and practical concerns.
Well, this conversation about expiation seems to go hand in hand with the contemplation of justice and like paying your dues that Jean Valjean has been fleeing from and contemplating for the whole story. Hugo describes this convent as another seat of slavery or another prison. On page 568 of our book, he says 2 seats of slavery, but in the former, so the society with a legal system, rescue possible, a legal limit always in view, and also escape. So interesting that he presents the societal version of imprisonment with more hope in it. The legal system itself is a chance for escape and refuge. In the second, so the convent, perpetuity, the only hope at the furthest reaches of the future, that gleam of liberty which men call death. In the first, the captives were chained by chains alone. In the other, chained by faith. So he seems to, by putting those two things side by side, say that though the legal system is not present, the nun actually says there's no justice or injustice in the convent. It's harsher. The existence in there is harsher, and the imprisonment more eternal, and only death can take you out of it. That seems backwards to me, at least in the description of the church that you gave, Ian, where people rush to the church for refuge from their earthly problems. This doesn't seem like a description of a place that I would want to go for refuge. It sounds like more of a prison than a prison.
And yet, on 566 before, it says, God has his own ways. The convent contributed, like Cosette, to confirm and complete in Jean Valjean the bishop's work. At the end, it says, the convent stopped him in his descent. And the descent or the fall is
into pride.
And yes, into pride, but we've seen that
And
imagery
hatred.
in the novel so many times. The fall of Fantine, the fall of the drowning man, right? The stopping a fall is just about the highest good I think that you can have in this novel. Although, I mean, there's also the fall that leads to light, right? The shadow that leads to the light. But
Mhm.
I don't know. I think it's supposed to be a good thing that there's something nurturing about the convent in a way, and the limitation in a way that the prison was not for him.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I wonder if we're not being led into some sort of a perpetual tension that he doesn't really intend to answer, unless he's already answered it in the form of the bishop, in the very opening of the story. Because in the bishop's case, we have a peculiar kind of asceticism. He's willfully given up all of his fortune, spends every dime that he has on the poor, and lives in a very spare way, right? And it's humility in its most in its purest form. I think that's the goal of all of the rules of this cloister. But in the bishop's case, it's eternally wedded to the practical concerns of one's neighbor rather than solely the spiritual concerns of one's neighbor. And I think that seems to be the distinction that's popping up for me. The nuns are concerned with everyone's spiritual condition, and they see their own activity as affecting the spiritual condition. The bishop is concerned, of course, with everyone's hearts, but his way of affecting those hearts is to take care of their bodies, to put clothes on them and get them medicine and feed them. And so maybe his image hangs over the novel and allows us to see that we're seeing an extreme focus on the spiritual in the cloister. And I don't know that there has been the opposite extreme yet. Maybe we'll get that later, an extreme focus on the practical and the physical and the worldly. And I wonder if Valjean is receiving the tools, having experienced the example of the bishop in the beginning, when he was at the very beginning of his faith journey. I wonder if he's receiving the tools now in the cloister to step out of it later and fill a middle role, a third road that combines those two spheres into something that looks more like faith put into action. What do you guys think of that idea?
Well, it does seem, I think that connection back to Monsieur Bienvenu is important because he is very relational. It's not just physical versus spiritual, it's ideological versus relational. And Monsieur Bienvenu is, he's loving, he's personal, he's concerned with the things that concern you, his neighbor. I think that the convent is also concerned with other people, but it's the idea of other people, right?
Like
they
that.
are expiating. He says it's expiation for others, but others is very general and broad.
Right.
And for Monsieur Bienvenu, he knows there are faces that jump to mind for those others that he's sacrificing his dinner for, or sacrificing that nice decoration in his room for, or a nice chair, that kind of thing. It's all very, very personal. So that's something that I noticed, that it maybe has to do with an idea of love and expiation, and then a personal expression of it. And I hope, like you do, that there's a bridge in this novel, that maybe Jean Valjean is being tempered and made into a bridge of those two goods.
Well, if there's going to be a bridge, there has to be truth in both of them, right? And it seems clear that no matter how harsh he is in his assessment of the cloister, he's also not casting it down. He is trying to outline something pure and beautiful at the heart of it. And I wonder if that pure, beautiful thing is not the humility that comes from death to self. And in Valjean, we have, because in exchange for his personal safety, physical safety, and for Cosette's life, he has to die. He has to become Ultimus Fauchelevent and stay in the convent and never leave. And he has to literally go through the grave in order to get in the front door of the convent and hide himself away forever, as far as he's concerned. That's a death to self that breeds real humility, we're told, right?
There's I think a disturbing theme that keeps popping up that speaks to what you're saying, which is that every time someone does something ideologically motivated for good, that is actually like quite literally something that we are glad that they did. Like in this case, Fauchelevent saving Jean Valjean as an act of generosity. And earlier on, let's see, what was the example I was thinking of? Oh, when Jean Valjean decides to present himself as prisoner 24601 in place of the other man. In both cases, there are real world consequences to their ideologically motivated decision. And I'm not using the ideological in a negative sense there.
Right.
Like
I wasn't either. Yeah.
I mean, like, they are doing it for morally good reasons, as they should. And yet, in the case of Jean Valjean earlier, the whole entire town collapses because he's chosen to do
the
the right
factory
thing.
closes and a
people
There's a
region.
suffer.
consequence.
Yeah.
And in this case, Fauchelevent steals that gravedigger's card and goes back to his house to return it to him later. And we discover that the guy has basically wailed on his wife and children as he has tried to find it. And so this Fauchelevent has caused suffering in a family because of a real world consequence to a good that he was trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Which I guess what I'm trying to say is even our best decisions or our best actions have, like, we have to be humble because there are negative consequences unintentionally sometimes.
Yeah.
We don't
It
have
reminds me
complete control.
too that he's still examining the life of faith, and there being consequences for sin. These nuns are doing what they're doing in full confidence that they are making reparation for sins that are unconfessed and unrepentant out in the world. They're trying to represent mankind before God, and all of their expiation is for their neighbor and that idea. But there are real world consequences for the things going on out there that they are just thinking of in the ideal realm. And Jean Valjean, as he witnesses their reparations that they're trying to make in, I can't remember the name of the act where they're laying in the crucifix pose for 40 hours at a time, that kind of thing. He's moved, intensely moved, and convicted of his heart attitude when he was a convict, when he was in a physical prison.
Yeah.
I think that maybe that ties into what you were saying, Emily, that these ideas of faith, of repentance, of forgiveness, there's a whole spiritual conversation going on. And then there are pictorial representations of it in the physical realm. And maybe even that legal system that Jean Valjean has been interacting with up to this point in the novel is just that, a picture of something that is real going on in the spiritual realm. So Jean Valjean is going to be a great bridge where that conversation is concerned as well.
Yeah.
What do you guys think where is Hugo going with this conversation about names? In the convent, just like in the prison, these women surrender their real world names and take on a godly name, and the prisoners get a number, which I think is a more inhuman version of the same thing.
Yeah.
Jean Valjean has once again died and been rebaptized into a new name,
which they don't call him.
Yeah. Has like 3 different names, and he is his good deeds are remembered by the Pope by a false name.
By a false name. What I think, so this is a hot take, and correct me if you guys don't think this is right, but I wonder if this is a little bit of the revolutionary spirit in Hugo.
Like comrade?
Yeah, like the most important name that Valjean has been given throughout the entire novel, the one that changed his life, is brother, which is an inclusive name that adds him to the teeming mass of humanity in a personalized way, rather than distinguishing him from them in a personalized way.
I like that.
And so and he seems to, I mean, it doesn't matter what name he's going by. Monsieur Madeleine is just fine. Valjean is okay. You know, he takes on a new name as often as he needs to, but the important name, the one that he holds to his heart that has really affected him, is brother.
I really like that. I also wonder if it's a tension too, though, that there are good reasons to surrender your name
Mm-hmm.
But then at the end of the day, you're waiting for someone to call you by your name,
Right.
your real name.
Right.
And maybe you don't even know what that name is. Maybe Jean Valjean doesn't even know what that name is that he needs to be called by. But he has a unique name too.
Yeah.
And there's a tragedy in the fact that he can't be known
Called
by it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
But
I'm sure that's true.
Yeah, I think there's probably, you're right. I mean, Hugo's drawing tensions all over the place, but come to think of it, he has two now. He has two names that are, that help him to cope with the tragedy of losing his own, and it's brother and father.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's now father also. Those names are more descriptive even of the man that he has become than his original name was.
Megan, you're going to say something.
I don't know if it directly pertains, but I'm just thinking about the renaming that happens in the convent versus the renaming that happens in a prison. In a prison, they're given a number and it's dehumanizing. In the convent, they're given a name that associates with part of Christ's life. So we have Mother Crucifixion, we have Mother Ascension, Mother Innocence. They're all associated with something about Christ, taking their identity from him alone. And I don't think that is a dehumanizing renaming, as fascinating as that is. What we know about each of those nuns is totally fascinating. But in passing, I just was struck by Mother Ascension. The only fact we know about that woman has nothing to do with her personality or anything, but she is as strong as two men. Mother Ascension is as strong as two men. And I think that is purposeful. She's been renamed, and with the renaming is grafted in the power of the ascension, the idea of Christ rising up out of the grave and into heaven in his rightful place. There's nothing more beautiful and powerful than that moment of Christ's story. And I think that kind of renaming, that association with the power of Christ is beautiful and inspiring rather than depressing. She's lost herself.
Yeah. I like that.
I
I'm
love the
trying to
romantics.
imagine a nun that is stronger than two
as strong as two men. I mean, she must be
Is
like
that
a
what it
gigantic
says? I thought
woman.
it was just
Just
as
the
strong as a man.
German Fräulein of a nun.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking for it. I thought it was as strong as two men.
No,
but
I remember that.
nope,
one.
as strong as a man. You're right.
No, as strong as a man.
Yeah, and then he says
well.
two men is better than Mother Ascension. Never mind.
Well, that's too bad.
Upside down and backwards. Maybe she's not a Fräulein.
She's not a If it were Maria we were dealing with here.
Well, she's as strong as a man. Anyway, the renaming is an interesting idea.
Well, I think we're about to get a time leap, which I can't say I'm not excited about. I'm interested to see some other characters join the fray. Our next section, our next book, our next, whatever we want to call it, volume is entitled Marius. So I think we're going to jump into Cosette's adolescence, it seems like, which will be fun.
But we have finished Cosette, the book, and we have also finished podcasting in 2022. And so we're going to wait to release our 2023 schedule after we've all had a good Christmas sleep.
Yeah.
So we will be back with you guys at some point in January.
Yep.
In the new year with a new reading schedule. And we hope you all have a wonderful Christmas. It is a great joy to us to get to do this show, and we're so glad that there are people out there listening. Do jump on to Facebook and interact with us. We would love to hear your thoughts about this wonderful novel. And until next time, my friends, bon appetit.
Bon appetit.
Bon appetit.